the pressures on Gen Z then, with regards to how they come to view the world, is downstream of multiple anti-civilisational factors. So the internet, by its very nature, and the way that we are plugged into a network that is ethereal and, as you mentioned, comes from many different angles and people can choose their own cultures, is it's immediately the thread is cut between the user and wherever it is that they're situated in place and time and amongst people. And then we've had the ideological transformation or formation within the education system over the years, which has left those of us inhabiting the here and now with very little to hold on to. So it'd be really interesting to hear about why you think there has been a movement toward the anti-civilisational movements and ideas, instead of, for example, taking the route that you and others on the reactionary right, as you've described them, have chosen, which is plumbing the past for its wisdom and the things that we can learn and the cultures that we can build. What represents those anti-civilisational ideas, and how can we define them?
Well, I think the cultural safety net has been snipped in the name of unmitigated freedom, but all that's happened is people that would have fallen and not had the capacity to catch themselves and would have been otherwise caught by the safety net of wholesome cultural incentives have just smacked and hit the bottom. And anyone lurking around, the sort of resentful goblins at the abyss, have been picking them up and saying, it's okay, dwell down here with us, you know. And so it takes a lot more deliberateness and a degree of self-consciousness when you do have that moment of betrayal or pain, or, for example, if your dad's not in the home, how do you learn the value of masculinity? Well, you go and seek out different advice online. You might go and read a book. You might go watch Jocko Willink or Jordan Peterson or Chris Williamson or, God forbid, Andrew Tate. And so you're developing a critical consciousness of something that wasn't imparted onto you. And for the people who just follow algorithms, who follow incentives, who aren't super conscious of things, who just regurgitate rote learned talking points because per luxury beliefs it gets them access to exclusive clubs or job opportunities or resources or friendship circles, they are following the most perverse of civilizational incentives. So when you said is civilization on the decline, yes, because what are the cultural incentives? Cultural incentives are to indefinitely defer when you have your family until the point at which many people, even though they report wanting children, we've reached 50% in the UK of women over 30 having no children, 25% of all women, therefore, and 50% of those women will never have kids despite many of them wanting them. So you're going to be bereft of a family for the 40 years after 40. That's a great tragedy, and that's very, very painful. That's a lie told to people. We put out the myth that you are going to have more value in your life indefinitely filling in spreadsheets than surrounded by said loving family. The idea that a found family of grievance-based activists or online satellite communities is as good as a local community, a congregation, a fealty to people also invested in the future health and prosperity of your nation. And so we are atomizing people and giving people these surrogate relationships which aren't morally nourishing on the auspice of, oh, any vice you want to constantly indulge in, actually, that's just the freedom of your will. Anyone who gives you advice is imposing on your will, and everyone around you should be affirming you at all times so that your conscience never does one of those pesky flare-ups and reminds you actually have obligations to other people if you want a meaningful life. And that's what's being given to people who don't self-consciously curate an ethic against those perverse cultural incentives. So that's why civilization is on the decline, because we have all of those people doing all of those things in private, being encouraged by the most perverse and creepy people, either online or in their immediate orbit. They don't filter those people out of their lives. They never claw their way up out of the crabs that are snipping at their heels in the bucket. And then the default thing is whenever someone like me comes along for the last how many years and has been saying, guys, I don't think this is a good idea. Young men, I think maybe you should not watch pornography until your eyes turn square. Young women, I don't think that you should hate men in your life just because you've had an encounter with one or two terrible men. Actually, some of them want to protect and provide and take care for you. And both of you should stop being at each other's throats and form a family. They go, well, what 2 consenting or 3 consenting or 4 consenting adults and a horse do behind closed doors isn't any business of mine. Well, if suddenly nobody's business is nobody's other business, then everyone in civilization is just, I don't know, gooning their way into oblivion and nobody cares for each other. Actually, no, I am interested in other people's business. I do care about people. And I think it's high time we started forming communities to shelter ourselves like a little Russian nesting doll against perverse cultural incentives.
The communities you talked about there, that sounds to me like something Rod Dreher has spoken about and written about in his book, The Benedict Option, where he talks about how there's much that those of us who may be despairing at the direction of civilization could do to make sure that whenever the opportunity arises to recreate or rebuild civilization on sturdier roots, we could go and create communities of people who are like-minded and focused on the things that you've spoken about, which are important, like the wisdom of the past and family and all of these things which we know work within our nature rather than against it, and provide flourishing, and is not just focused purely on the individual, which is, I suppose, where we've gotten to, right? As we are these atoms who can do whatever it is that we want to do because don't judge me and it's my choice, and that's the thing that is most important in this world. I suppose looking around, the economy is set up to, whether it's digital or physical, the economy is set up to create lots of consumers and individual atomistic lives. And so I suppose the tidal wave is pretty strong at this point against civilizational ideas and trends. What prospect do you think that there is of the pendulum swinging back, and what would need to happen, do you think?
Well, you need both personal resilience and structural reform, and I think personal resilience you can ensure independently. Structural reform, you just have to push for collectively in different avenues and hope politicians are listening. I don't think they will listen in the next 5 years. But on that point, I mean, the economy is set up in such a way where we are classified as universal unisex consumer units rather than inextricable embodied constituents of a household. And we used to consider ourselves household, and we've moved from belonging to one household to the next. That was the sort of fulcrum on which movement from childhood to adulthood came about, until very recently, really. The Industrial Revolution set this off, then the Sexual Revolution, the Digital Revolution. Basically, technology has dislodged us from time, place, people, and culture to think of ourselves as universal men, the anywhere class David Goodhart talks about, that can be picked up and dropped off on any soil and not have any cultural, ethnic, historical holdover, and instead just produce goods, consume goods, and then, I don't know, be turned into sustainable carbon neutral mulch when we eventually expire and just go to sleep forever, because there's obviously no spiritual afterlife in the minds of these elites. Ivan Illich talked a lot about this in his book Gender. He also wrote a book called Shadow Work, but basically his concept is shadow work, in that our lives are now reorganized around maximally creating productive work at work, and then going home and then maximally recuperating using consumer goods to rest at an optimal level to re-enter the marketplace. It's the Sigma male grind set we see of, you know, the online right is as bad for this as anyone else, of like lionizing Patrick Bateman because he has a perfect skincare routine, a perfect fitness routine, and he goes to work and he's, you know, very dedicated and formulaic, and you don't want that. Like, filling out spreadsheets ad infinitum does not provide worth to your life. And especially when in an economy now where, and the TikTok girls that keep making, you know, TikToks in their car complaining about the cost of living and that, are actually right about this, and I will defend them, where you make nothing for no one, it cannibalizes your social life and an increasing amount of your time for diminishing returns, and you have infinite consumer goods that are all transitory, they're all digital, they're all subscription services, you never actually own anything, you will own nothing, and you will not be happy, it turns out. But you don't have the basic essentials that even the grandparents that we have, and, you know, God bless them, I love them, but they are at fault for this, which is a home and the possibility of having a family under that roof. You don't need constant digital distractions, breads and circuses. You can have a little bit of economic hardship so long as life can provide opportunities to create meaning and thick bonds of obligation to one another, which enrich your life even though you are acting in service. And so essentially, like, individual consumer capitalism has made everyone miserable. We don't need more stuff. We need more people with our good intentions in our lives that we can do stuff for.